Now that, I'm afraid, is thought police. That is the policing of thoughts. It is not the policing of actions. That, whatever the issue is, whether it's gender or anything else, that is deeply illiberal, it is deeply dangerous, and we must nip that in the bud right now.
Let's talk about hate incidents, shall we? Tory MSP Murdo Fraser has threatened legal action against Police Scotland because the police have logged a social media comment he made as a hate incident. So for context, he likened identifying as non-binary to identifying as a cat in relation to Scottish Government equality policies last November. Police decided no crime had been committed after a complaint was made, but Murdo Fraser has accused police of acting unlawfully by recording it as a hate incident. He posted a video on Twitter. Here's a bit of it.
I've written today to Police Scotland to challenge their policy around the recording of non-crime hate incidents. Back in November, a social media post of mine criticising Scottish Government policy on gender was reported to Police Scotland by a trans rights activist as a hate crime. Police Scotland recorded this as a hate incident without informing me. Having now taken legal advice with the support of the Free Speech Union, I believe that action on the part of Police Scotland was unlawful in three respects. Firstly, the European Convention on Human Rights protects free speech and specifically protects expressions of political view. Secondly, there is a specific and additional protection under the Equality Act that has been established in case law for gender-critical opinions, which this was. And thirdly, in recording this as a hate incident, Police Scotland breached the Data Protection Act.
So that's MSP Murdo Fraser. Now, this is particularly pertinent because on April the 1st, next week, the Scottish Government's new Hate and Public Order Scotland Act will come into force, which criminalises threatening or abusive behaviour which is intended to stir up hatred based on certain characteristics, including age, disability, sexual orientation and transgender identity. Andy, let's come to you first on this, and Murdo Fraser's kind of complaint really about this, and yes, the potency of it because of the new legislation which kicks in from next week. What do you make of this, first of all, in terms of what the action Murdo Fraser's taking?
Right, let me bear with me, because it's really important that we split issues out in order for people to be able to understand what's going on here. There are three issues here that need to be separated. The first one is gender recognition, because that's what ultimately this Twitter exchange had been about in the first place. Now, the gender recognition debate goes back a fairly long way now. You know, we've been through it a little bit on this podcast before. I think there are lots of arguments in various directions on gender recognition. The biggest concern I have about gender recognition, as I've expressed before, is what we are doing to children, which I think in some cases amounts to not much less than state experimentation socially and medically on young children. I think it's an enormous concern, but I think that in itself is a separate issue to the one that we need to discuss in relation to Murdo Fraser. So let's put that issue to one side. The second issue I think we need to put to one side is the Hate Crimes Act coming into force on Monday, because that, again, is a matter of significant debate. There's a bit of opinion both ways on this Hate Crimes Act in terms of what it's going to do and whether it's a risk to free speech and whether it's not a risk to free speech. There's also a bit of discussion, a bit of concern about the Scottish Government's recent record on making good law. We talked about this a little bit last Thursday night, actually, in fact, and whether or not the government currently is able and has the capacity to create good law and law that doesn't have loopholes in it. So that is an issue, but again, it's a separate issue from this particular one here. So that's two issues out of the way. This is different. This is something that's already happening irrespective of the Act, and it's already happening outside of gender recognition. It's not about gender recognition. This is about the police taking action, quote unquote, keeping a record of things that it itself says are not crimes. Now that should, to everybody who believes in free speech, that's a massive, massive concern. So the reason Murdo Fraser's name is on file, or however you want to describe it, is because one person made a complaint about something he tweeted based on what that one person's interpretation was of what Murdo Fraser meant, not of what he said, of what he meant. Now that, I'm afraid, is thought police. That is the policing of thoughts. It is not the policing of actions. That, whatever the issue is, whether it's gender or anything else, that is deeply illiberal, it is deeply dangerous, and we must nip that in the bud right now.
Okay, with all of that in mind, let's have a listen then to how First Minister Humza Yousaf responded when he was asked about this the other day.
In terms of incidents and hate crime incidents, it's important that they are recorded, because what it does is it gives police an idea of where there might be spikes in hatred. That behaviour might not be criminal, but they can then see a pattern that is simply done so police can see if there's a rise in anti-Semitism, for example, or a rise in homophobia right across the country. It's important that police are able to monitor any patterns of hatred that might emerge.
To monitor any patterns of hatred that might emerge. Geoff?
Yeah, well, let me first say, Andy's synopsis there of separating the three issues is really important context, because I think there are a lot of people that are kind of, perhaps not deliberately, but misunderstanding that there is that separation of issues here, and it's really important to understand that. I have to say, forget politics, guys. As a citizen, this makes me feel very, very uncomfortable. The idea that my name, your names, could be on some sort of record held by Police Scotland, even though no crime has been committed, and entirely subjective as well in terms of any allegation put forward. I am utterly uncomfortable with this. And as Andy rightly pointed out, which is so important to do so, this is already going on just now, pre the legislation coming in. So let's separate that. The question, therefore, to me is, what is Police Scotland doing here? Are our politicians fully aware of this extent of powers that they have been using and administering? What is the role of the Scottish Police Authority in all of this? How are these things working? Has Police Scotland got too powerful following the merger? I was in government when that happened. I think these are the sort of questions we have to start asking ourselves. But I'm sorry, First Minister, and I do recognise that he's in an interview and all the rest of it, but I don't think it's okay that this happens. In fact, I think it's far from okay.